Okay, so my favorite type of video to watch on YouTube is the history documentaries. I really nerd out about them. So in this video, we decided to do our own history documentary about the town of Donald, BC. It's gonna be a little bit different, but this time I'm gonna get to film my own history documentary.
And now, I don't know if a history documentary belongs on our channel, but Chace is a nerd and he's insisting. So I guess we'll see how the video does and the followers and see kind of who was right.
Yeah, I think the video will do good. I like history documentaries. I think we can make our own. On the 1st of July in 1867, Canada became a country through Confederation. However, it wasn't until 1871 that British Columbia joined the rest of Canada in Confederation. At that time, the federal government of Canada had made a promise to the people of British Columbia that should they join Confederation, the government would build a railway across Canada, linking each province together. This led to the construction and the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Through blasting and drilling and mining, they built the railway and completed the Kicking Horse Railway Pass by 1883. In 1884, Canadian Pacific Railway officially acquired the Donald property from the Government of Canada. They used that as a divisional headquarters. This was known as First Crossing at the time. It wasn't called Donald. It was known that because this was the first crossing of the Columbia River. At that time, they had decided to make Donald the Western Divisional Headquarters. This is why Donald, British Columbia is the terminal point for Mountain and Pacific time. If you go to the far end of our property, that is basically where the time zone changes, because that's when trains heading west, those crews would operate on Pacific time. Trains heading east would operate on Alberta Mountain time. Donald was essentially a rough and rowdy town. In Pierre Berton's book, The Last Spike, Donald is known as a garish little community on a frozen riverbank. It was a gambling, drinking, fighting little mountain town. It was mainly shacks and saloons with ambitious names like the Cosmopolitan, the Queen of the West, the Sweet Hotel, the Italian Restaurant, and the French Quarter. During that time, there were stories where a barkeeper had shot a customer through the lung. Drinking, gambling, and prostitution were common as you find in towns of the Midwest. But in 1886, the Canadian Pacific Railway decided that that Western mentality of a town needed to change. The town needed to grow up. With that, they hired a surveyor and they surveyed the town property and renamed the town to Donald after Donald A. Smith, the co-founder of the Canadian Pacific Railway. At that time, CP had built a hotel, worker housing was being built, a police station was built, and a 12-stall roundhouse was built here on the property to accommodate the service work that had to be done on the locomotive and various rolling stock of the Canadian Pacific Railway, as the rest of the railway was built through Rogers Pass at the time. In 1887, the first church was built. It was St. Peter's Anglican Church by Reverend Harry Irwin. At that time, the first school had opened, the first hospital had been built. During the 1890s, this train station had refreshment rooms, telegraph offices, indoor plumbing, ice houses, part stores, workshops, and about 200 employees. By 1896, phone service had been established, but by then, they came up with the idea of a planned relocation of the Canadian Pacific Railway workshop and offices to Golden, British Columbia, moving that part of it east, and to Revelstoke, British Columbia, moving the rest of the station west. By 1897, the town site had reached a population of 500 people, of which there were 68 children in school. Unfortunately, at this point, the hospital closed and relocated. They did build a road between Golden and Donald, the Golden Donald Upper Road, which still largely exists today, that you can still drive if you feel like not taking the Trans-Canada Highway. In 1900s, they decided to relocate the city of Donald to Golden, BC, where it is now. They took the buildings that were savable and built well in Donald, brought them down to the river, put them behind a paddle wheeler, brought them upstream and relocated those buildings to the current site of Golden, which left Donald sparsely populated. At that time, it had a few people living out there. There was a couple tiny portable mills that were existing in the area. It still served as a switching yard for the Canadian Pacific Railway in a bit, basically a siding that you see today. In 1902, a few years later, the town officially ended with the post office closing, and by 1903, the new station was built in Golden. However, 1914 to 1918, that was interrupted by World War I. And this is where we see a large resurgence in the economy of Donald. With World War I and the trench warfare, there was a huge demand for wood products. Well, we talk about shells and bullets and the armament and the steel that went into the tanks. This was trench warfare. Trenches led to wood siding for those trenches. Those trenches spanned all the way from Belgium to Switzerland, and they had to be lined with wood. That large wood demand came from Canada. As of such, small sawmills popped up in Donald as portable mills, railway mills. That largely regrew this town. All the way through 1927 up into the 1930s, the town of Donald had become a mill town. With the Great Depression occurring, the demand for lumber had dropped. There was a huge need to get people working, and there was another huge need to reunite Canada with a road. At that time, there was no way to drive from Vancouver, British Columbia to the rest of Canada without having to go into the United States. That needed to change. They wanted you to be able to drive from Vancouver all the way to Ottawa in a vehicle without having to go into the States. That led to the construction of the Big Bend Highway. Donald, BC became a major work camp. After construction of the Big Bend Highway, a lot of the residents became more permanent. They worked through a collection of small mills that existed here. These were small individual mills ran by 4 or 5 people. It wasn't until the outbreak of World War II in 1939 that these small sawmills got together to create Selkirk spruce mills. During World War II, Selkirk Spruce Mill existed and grew to support the war effort. Things like wood for planes, shipping crates, just anything wood related to fuel the war effort got milled here, processed, loaded on rail cars, once again to go over to Europe to support that. After the end of World War II, this place, through Selkirk Spruce Mills, largely supported the rebuilding of Europe, as well as supporting the baby boomer establishment when people came back from the war, had a lot of babies, had a lot of kids, and you really see this growing of the middle class. Well, Selkirk Spruce Mills was there to support it. In addition to Selkirk Spruce Mill, though, the small individual mills didn't always go away. They've existed in this region all the way from the 1930s to the present day, with Travis behind his shop existing as a small portable sawmill, largely embracing the culture of Donald, BC. In the 1960s, the next major Canadian infrastructure building project commenced. That was building of the Rogers Pass Highway to reroute the Trans-Canada Highway from the Big Bend to follow a similar line to the Canadian Pacific Railway. This would shave 5 hours of travel time off of the drive between Revelstoke to Golden. This was completed in 1962, and the completion of this highway and moving of the Big Bend Highway allowed the Mica Dam construction and the Kinnebaska Lake to be formed. The site north of Revelstoke was chosen, the Columbia River was dammed, and the Kinnebaska Lake was formed. In the 1960s, there was another large change to occur. Evans Forest Products saw the potential of this site for the location of their new modern sawmill operations. The newly constructed Trans-Canada Highway through Rogers Pass reduced trucking time dramatically, as well as the additional access to Canadian Pacific Railway to ship out their lumber made it a no-brainer. So in 1965, construction had started on a new veneer plant and warehouse. That is the current large warehouse that we see on the shop. As well, in addition, there was boiler room, dry kiln, and a truck and maintenance shop that was built that we are currently working in today, building our newest modern trucks. That existed as a sawmill and a community up until 1995 when Evans Forest Products shut down. Since then, Donald, BC fell into disarray. The buildings started collapsing. They started being fallen down. A couple of them burnt down. The log yard had left. All the way from 1995 up until 2025, when Edison Motors acquired the property, and now we are working to rebuild the town of Donald. We love that it had the employee housing back in the day. We're bringing that back in. We're bringing back that industry, that thing. It's not sitting idle anymore for 30 years. It had a huge history. Donald, British Columbia had a great history from uniting Canada with the Trans-Canadian Railway. It was the final point in the Trans-Canada highway system. So now, for us to be a Canadian truck manufacturer based on a plot of land that has so much history in Canadian transport legend, to the forestry industry with sawmills and us building logging trucks, I could not imagine a more perfect spot for Edison Motors to be located. If you want to learn more about the history of Golden, Donald, and the surrounding area, I really suggest stopping by the Golden Museum. It's well worth the detour to come in, say hi. Fantastic, you won't regret it. Anyways, thanks for sticking around and watching our documentary style video we did. Much to the agreement there, and hopefully this went well. Let us know if you like the documentary style in the comments and help me prove Darren wrong.